Picking up from part one, this is part two of the historical background for early biological theories of criminology. So let's move on from the Crusades. At the end of the Crusades, about 60 years later, the Black Death, the very first episode of it that lasted roughly 4 years from 1347 to 1351 occurred. Now, there was an estimated 75 to 200 million people who died. We don't have really good numbers, but here's the thing. The Black Death happened because the Crusades opened up some trade routes. There was a lot more travel now, back and forth, and cultures began to interact that had not previously interacted, or at least had not interacted for several hundred years. So one society might have built up an immunity to something that another society had not been exposed to, and they didn't have that immunity. But then we had things like the Black Death. So now keep in mind that we're still in the Dark Ages. So the Black Death decimated the planet. We're not certain. There's not a lot of evidence about whether the Black Death hit the Americas, but to the known world of travel at the time, the Black Death was a devastating blow. But what's interesting is that when we get out of the Black Death, we enter the Renaissance, roughly 1400 to 1600 of the Common Era. So during the Renaissance, we have Renaissance men. So Renaissance men were all of these men who were these great artists, like Leonardo da Vinci, Botticelli. That's his painting, The Birth of Venus. It's not the whole painting there, but it's the painting, The Birth of Venus, that is in most art appreciation books. But there is also some athletic things beginning to happen as well during the Renaissance. That art, science, commerce, all of these things begin to develop. During the Renaissance, we get the telescope. We begin to recognize that the Earth revolves around the sun and is not the center of the universe. So a lot of scientific advancements, Now, during the Renaissance, towards the end of it, because the printing press had been invented during the Renaissance as well, it was invented in 1445. So not even 100 years later, on November the 10th, 1517, Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg. Now, what began to happen is that literacy became an issue. See, before the printing press, the way books were made was an individual would copy a book, would make a copy. And this would be someone who had really good penmanship and who could also decorate pages. Sometimes they would be mass produced. By mass produced, we mean maybe 10, 15, 20 at a time. And that's where someone would be at the front of a room and they would read the text, and the 15 to 20 people in the room would be sitting at desks copying the text that's being read to them. Very, very expensive proposition. So when the printing press was invented with movable type, the availability of books was much greater. And when books are more available, more people want to read. Now, what's interesting is that before the invention of the printing press, even a lot of priests could not read. They had to memorize through oral passing down what they would say in the liturgy. But with the invention of the printing press, that began to change. So when the printing press came out, Gutenberg printed the first thing that he printed was a Bible, which was a very, very big undertaking. But when the Bible was printed, and even though it was originally in Latin, and most people couldn't read Latin, but when more and more people can read, more and more people, especially in those days, wanted to read the Bible. Now, at the time, though, there was also widespread hopelessness. There was still a lot of poverty, a lot of things like that going on. The Catholic Church was selling indulgences. There was the famous line by John Tetzel, "When a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs." So Martin Luther, a Catholic monk who also has a doctorate in theology and is a professor of theology in Wittenberg, goes to Rome and actually sees all the excesses and vices of the Catholic Church at the time, and it appalls him. So he writes his 95 Theses to the Pope, believing that the Pope will be on his side, by the way, when he writes them, and he nails them to the church door. Well, folks that own a printing press in town see the 95 Theses, they really love them. They take it down from the church and they make copies and circulate them. So the Protestant Reformation is born from that, because people can start reading the Bible for themselves, especially once Luther translated the Bible into German. Once it was translated into German and the common person could read it, they could see that there's nothing about buying indulgences in the Bible. So the Reformation began in earnest when the Catholic Church wanted to silence Luther. Ironically, once after Luther was dead and a couple of popes died, the church realized that Luther's criticisms in the 95 Theses were accurate, and they started making the reforms that Luther wanted to make within the church. Okay, now what's interesting though is that with the increase in trade routes, the Western world was becoming more technologically advanced. And as they became more technologically advanced, they could do more of the traveling away to other places. But they misinterpreted this technological advancement as meaning that their culture, their race, was superior to others. So this empire mentality, this imperialism began to crop up. Spain, Portugal, England, France, and Belgium especially wanted to expand their empires. The U.S. is here because England wanted to expand its empire. Never would have been here if England had not been trying to do that. Now, what's the purpose of expanding the empire? Taxes, more money, more money. So the colonization mentality took root, began to take root in the Renaissance, and then it really took root during the Enlightenment. Now, what's interesting with the Enlightenment, though, is that we had those folks who were in government, those folks who ran government, like emperors and kings and czars, that were seeing themselves as superior to all others. Whether they admit it or not, the royalty in England today believed that God appointed them to be in that position because they are superior to all other human beings. But there was a resurgence of philosophy, and with this resurgence, there was a study of the ancient Greek philosophers, especially Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, um, all the ancient philosophers. And because of that study, this idea of democracy and the rights of the individual became more and more important. Equality, the idea of people having equality before the law, especially, became an important concept during the Enlightenment. However, things weren't always all that great. So there's a painting here from the U.S. Um, Revolutionary War, um, but there is also a painting here from the French Revolution. And the French Revolution violated the rights of the individual. In the U.S., the founding fathers wanted to make sure that we all had the freedom to practice and espouse the religion we believed in. In France, no, we're getting rid of religion. We're going to completely get rid of it. Um, in the U.S., freedom of religion. In France, freedom from religion during the Revolution. Um, but it's important to understand that throughout the Enlightenment, while we're looking at the equality of the individuals and the rights of the individuals, we're also engaging in academic racism, and that's going to be the next part of this video.